Morning broke timidly over the New York skyline, bathing a modest brick apartment building in the working-class neighborhoods of Queens in a warm golden light. Inside a small, white-walled apartment, the smell of freshly cooked scrambled eggs, hash browns, and black coffee emanated from the kitchen, filling every corner of the room with a false domestic warmth. Elizabeth, wearing a faded cotton robe whose colors had washed out long ago, moved nimbly between the stove and the dining table. Her expert hands flipped the hash browns, added just the right amount of salt to the eggs, and then popped 2 slices of bread into the toaster. She did everything in a silence that had become her constant companion over the last 2 years. It was her morning ritual, a musicless dance offered to her only spectator who rarely applauded, her husband, Jason. When Jason walked out of the bedroom, the penetrating scent of an expensive cologne instantly overpowered the fragrance of Elizabeth's kitchen. He wore an impeccably ironed navy blue dress shirt and perfectly tailored black slacks. His leather shoes shined like mirrors. He was the very picture of success, a rising marketing manager at a massive corporation called Sterling Holdings. He shot a quick glance at the dining table, frowning slightly when he saw the breakfast that had been served. "Scrambled eggs again?" he asked. His tone was flat, more of a statement than a question. There was no thank you, nor a good morning smile. Elizabeth only offered a faint smile, a trained expression designed to hide the wounds in her heart. "I'm sorry, Jason, I thought you liked it. Yesterday you said it was delicious," she replied softly, as she poured coffee into Jason's favorite mug. Jason scoffed lightly, pulled out a chair, and sat down. "Just because it's delicious does not mean I want to eat this every single day. Elizabeth, every now and then, make a breakfast with a little more class, like avocado toast with smoked salmon, or some expensive brand of artisan cereal. You know what people in the office eat. This just makes me look poor." He picked up a forkful of eggs with a lazy gesture, as if performing a grueling chore. Elizabeth did not answer. She simply sat across from Jason, sipping her hot tea in silence. This was how their mornings went every day. Jason with his dazzling world, a world of status and image, and Elizabeth with the world she had created for herself inside that apartment. A world of forced simplicity. Jason never knew that the woman sitting in front of him, the one he secretly called a small-town girl, could buy out the commercial bakery and the entire wheat farm with a single phone call. He did not know that Sterling Holdings, the place where he worked himself to the bone to climb the corporate ladder, was owned entirely by the woman whose breakfast he was currently despising. Elizabeth Sterling, the sole heiress to the late Richard Sterling's massive business empire, had deliberately given up her crown. She was tired, exhausted by a world that only saw her as a walking pile of dollar bills. The bitter memories of her past were still deeply etched into her mind, like a burn that never fades. Several years before meeting Jason, she had been in a relationship with a man named Derek. Derek was a charming guy with sweet words capable of melting an iceberg. He adored Elizabeth, or rather, he adored Elizabeth's bank account. He never hesitated to ask for the latest sports car as a birthday gift or a luxury watch as a token of love. Elizabeth, who at the time was still naive and yearning for sincere affection, gave him everything. The climax came when Derek proposed to her. Elizabeth was so happy, feeling that she had finally found someone who loved her for who she was. They planned a lavish, high-society wedding. However, a week before the big day, Elizabeth accidentally overheard Derek on a phone call with his friend. "Of course I am going to marry her. After I am officially her husband, half of the Sterling fortune will be mine. After that, we can party all we want. A boring woman like her is only good for squeezing out her wealth." Elizabeth's world collapsed. She canceled the wedding right then and there, kicked Derek out of her life, and decided to hide. She was sick of men approaching her with ulterior motives. She yearned to be just Elizabeth, not Elizabeth Sterling. And so her masquerade began. She bought an apartment in a working-class neighborhood in Queens, far from the hustle and wealth of Manhattan. She changed her appearance, locking all her designer clothes and luxury jewelry in a secret closet. She started living like an ordinary person, working part-time at a small local bookstore. That was where she met Jason. Back then, Jason was just a low-level marketing employee who stopped by looking for a book. He seemed so ambitious, full of enthusiasm, and his eyes sparkled when he talked about his dreams. He had no idea who Elizabeth was. He only saw a simple bookstore clerk. He approached her, courted her with promises of a bright future. To Elizabeth, this felt like a breath of fresh air. Jason loved her. He loved Elizabeth the regular girl, not Elizabeth the heir to the throne. Or at least, That is what she thought. So when Jason proposed, Elizabeth accepted with high hopes. She decided to keep up her charade. She wanted to be absolutely sure that Jason's love was truly sincere. She planned to tell Jason who she really was at the right time, when she was certain he loved her without the sterling last name getting in the way. She only asked him for one thing before they got married. She wanted Jason to change jobs. She did not want there to be any chance of him accidentally discovering her identity, but Jason flatly refused. I fought incredibly hard to get my position at Sterling Holdings, Elizabeth. It is everybody's dream company. I'm not going to quit. Elizabeth, not wanting to seem pushy and raise suspicions, finally gave in. She could only hope that Jason, being just a mid-level manager, would never have any business that would bring him face-to-face with upper management or the corporate owners. After 2 years of marriage, Elizabeth's hopes slowly faded away. Jason had managed to get promoted to manager, but his attitude toward Elizabeth worsened. The higher his position got, the more he felt that Elizabeth was a burden. He started to feel embarrassed about acknowledging her as his wife in front of his glamorous coworkers. He frequently came home late at night, using late meetings as an excuse, with the faint scent of another woman's perfume lingering on his collar. He became increasingly calculating, giving her a grocery allowance that was extremely tight, even though his manager's salary was more than enough. He did not know that Elizabeth had to secretly wire a large sum of money from her massive personal trust fund into their household account every month, just to keep the kitchen running and the bills paid. I am heading out. Jason's voice interrupted Elizabeth's thoughts. He was already standing in the doorway, adjusting his tie. He did not turn around. There was no kiss on the forehead or the cheek. There was no warm hug, just a brief notice that he was leaving. Elizabeth nodded. Drive safely, Jason. After the sound of Jason's car faded down the street, silence once again enveloped the apartment. Elizabeth looked at Jason's plate of eggs, which was only a quarter eaten. That leftover food felt like a symbol of their marriage, an offering that was never truly appreciated. She carried the plate to the kitchen, feeling a burning sensation in her eyes. Patience has its limits. And Elizabeth felt that the limit of her patience was now as thin as a thread. She looked at her reflection in the kitchen window, a woman in a faded robe with a tired face. This was not her. It was a character she had created, a role she had played so perfectly that she had almost forgotten who she really was. But today, the first cracks in her mask were beginning to show. She wondered how long she would have to keep up this charade. How long would she have to be a shadow in her own home, when she was the sun at the company where her husband served? A week passed with the same routine. Silent mornings, criticized breakfasts, and lonely nights. Elizabeth lived her days like a robot. Her heart felt numb. The hope that had once bloomed in her chest was now withered, turned into the dust of disappointment. She began to accept the bitter reality that Jason would probably never change. The man she had married was not a prince disguised as a frog, but a frog who dreamed of becoming a prince by stepping on the backs of others, including his own wife. One evening, Jason came home earlier than usual. His face looked radiant, a sight so rare that it surprised Elizabeth a little. He even brought a box of pastries from a famous Manhattan bakery, Elizabeth's favorite dessert. She received it with a glimmer of hope. Would today be different? Had Jason finally realized his mistakes? What is it, Jason? It is rare to see you so cheerful, Elizabeth greeted him as she took his briefcase. Jason smiled from ear to ear, a smile Elizabeth had not seen in months. I have great news. I am getting promoted to senior manager. And to celebrate, the company is throwing a massive annual gala this weekend. All the top executives will be there. It is my chance to shine, he exclaimed, full of enthusiasm. Elizabeth's heart sank. So that was the reason. It was not because he missed her. It was not because he wanted to fix their relationship. It was all for his own ambition. Nevertheless, Elizabeth put on her best smile. Wow, congratulations, Jason. I am so happy for you. Jason continued, pulling a gold-embossed envelope from his briefcase. I want you to come with me. He handed the invitation to Elizabeth. For a moment, she was stunned. This was the first time Jason had ever invited her to an important office event. Up until now, he always had 100 excuses to go alone. The event is boring. You definitely would not like it. It is only for executives. A spark of hope reignited in Elizabeth's heart. Could this be a good sign? Was Jason finally ready to present her as his wife, to acknowledge her in his professional world? She opened the invitation. Printed in gold ink on thick, luxurious paper, it read, Sterling Holdings Annual Celebration Gala. The location: the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Elizabeth's heart beat a little faster. She was going to attend her own party as the guest of one of her employees. The irony was so bitter. Of course I want to go, Jason. Thank you for inviting me, Elizabeth said with a sincere voice. The smile on Jason's face faded slightly, replaced by a serious expression. He sat down on the sofa, gesturing for Elizabeth to sit down as well. There are a few things we need to talk about. A few conditions, he said, using a tone that made Elizabeth's stomach churn. Conditions? She repeated, not understanding. Yes, conditions, Jason affirmed. Listen, Elizabeth, the people coming to this party are not just anybody. They are directors, investors, important people. Appearances are everything to them. I do not want the slightest mistake to damage my image. Elizabeth swallowed hard. A bad feeling began to wash over her. First, your clothes. Jason looked Elizabeth up and down. His gaze was as if he were evaluating cheap merchandise. Wear your plainest dress, a dark black or dark brown one. Nothing with patterns, nothing with bright colors. And most importantly, do not wear any jewelry. No necklaces, no earrings, no bracelets, just your regular watch. Elizabeth thought about the plain dresses hanging in her closet, dresses she had bought at a thrift store for under $20. She thought of her collection of world-class designer gowns hidden in her secret closet, gowns whose price tag could buy a car. She also thought of her jewelry box filled with diamonds and sapphires inherited from her mother. Jason's request felt like a slap to the face. Second, Jason continued, not caring about the change in Elizabeth's expression. Do not talk much while we are there. Just smile. If someone asks you something, give short answers. Do not try to start a conversation with anyone, especially my bosses. You do not understand their world. You would only embarrass yourself and me. Every word Jason spoke felt like a needle piercing Elizabeth's heart. He was not inviting her as his partner, but as a silent ornament that shouldn't shine too brightly. And third, and this is the most important part, Jason leaned forward, his gaze piercing. When we are there, do not act like my wife. Act normal. Keep your distance from me. I will be busy networking, talking to important people. I do not want you clinging to me and bothering me. Pretend you are just coming as a distant relative who happened to tag along. Understood? All the hope Elizabeth had felt ignite was completely extinguished, doused by the ice-cold water of Jason's cruelty. So this was his purpose. He was inviting her only to fulfill a formality, or perhaps because there was an unwritten rule that employees had to bring a +1. But once there, her status would be degraded, her presence camouflaged. She would no longer be a wife, just a distant relative. This humiliation felt so painful, so damaging to her pride as a woman and a wife. Elizabeth could only nod slowly. She had a lump in her throat, unable to utter a single word. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held them back with all her strength. She would not give Jason the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Seeing Elizabeth obey, Jason smiled with satisfaction. Good that you understand. This is for our future too, Elizabeth. If I succeed, you will be happy too, right? He gave Elizabeth a condescending pat on the shoulder. Then he stood up and walked into the bedroom, leaving Elizabeth stunned in the living room, holding the gold invitation that felt burning hot in her hands. That night, Elizabeth could not sleep. She lay next to Jason, who was already sleeping soundly, listening to his soft snores that sounded like a mockery. She felt so stupid. Stupid for having hope. Stupid for continually trying to endure it all. She got out of bed and walked slowly to her secret home office hidden behind a bookshelf. She opened her laptop and made a video call. The face of an older, wise, and authoritative man appeared on the screen. Mr. Vance, the senior managing director of Sterling Holdings, her father's most trusted confidant, and the only person in the company who knew Elizabeth's true identity. Miss Sterling, what is the matter at this hour of the night? Asked Mr. Vance with a worried expression. Elizabeth told him everything about the party invitation, about the conditions Jason had imposed. Mr. Vance listened intently. His face hardened with anger. How dare he, ma'am? This is unacceptable. You should not have to endure such humiliation. Cancel it, do not go. Let me teach him a lesson, Mr. Vance said furiously. Elizabeth shook her head slowly. Her eyes shined with a different light. It was no longer the light of sadness, but of determination. No, Mr. Vance. I will go. I have to go, Elizabeth interrupted with a firm voice. I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to know just how low he is willing to push me. I am tired of this charade, sir. Perhaps this party will be the final stage for the two of us. Mr. Vance fell silent. He saw in her eyes the same look her late father had, the look of a leader who would not falter. Understood, Miss Sterling. What should I prepare? Prepare everything, sir. Set the stage, because it looks like there will be a grand performance this weekend in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. A performance where the Queen will finally reclaim her crown, Elizabeth whispered, more to herself. When she closed the laptop, her heart no longer felt pain. There was only a cold void and a burning promise of vengeance. The gala would not be Jason's night of glory. On the contrary, it would be the night of his destruction, and Elizabeth would be the director. That evening, the air felt heavy and suffocating. Elizabeth stood in front of the large mirror in her bedroom, observing her reflection with an empty gaze. She wore a plain, long-sleeved black dress with a straight cut that fell just below the knee. It was the cheapest dress she could find in her closet. She had bought it at a thrift store a year ago. The fabric felt a bit rough to the touch, and the stitching was not very neat, but it met all the criteria Jason had established. Simple, dark, and discreet. It was a blank canvas, a shadow ready to blend into the crowd. Her long black hair was pulled back neatly into a simple ponytail. Her face was clean, without makeup, except for a little lip balm. She wore no jewelry. Her wrists were bare, her long neck empty. Her ears were not adorned with earrings. The reflection in the mirror was that of a stranger. This was not the Elizabeth Sterling who used to lead board meetings in expensive designer power suits. Nor was it the cheerful Elizabeth from the bookstore. That reflection was the embodiment of Jason's desire. A woman with no identity, no shine, no voice. She remembered the high society galas she used to attend with her parents. Her mother would help her choose a shimmering silk gown, style her hair with diamond pins, and place the family heirloom necklace around her neck. You are a Sterling, my daughter. Walk with your head held high. Show the world the beauty of your heart reflected in your smile. That is what her mother used to say to her. Tonight, she would walk with her head down, hiding not only her identity but also her shattered heart. Are you ready? Jason's voice sounded from the doorway. He was already looking around knockin' impeccable in an expensive, custom black tuxedo, looking very handsome and powerful. He looked Elizabeth up and down. A small nod indicated his satisfaction. Elizabeth's appearance was perfect in the sense that it would not attract anyone's attention. Good, let's go. Let's not be late. The drive into Manhattan felt like a journey to the gallows. Jason focused on driving, smiling occasionally as he glanced at his phone screen. Elizabeth was certain he was texting Ashley, planning his night of triumph. Elizabeth, for her part, just looked out the window. The city lights blinked like thousands of eyes watching her, silent witnesses to the drama that was about to unfold. She did not feel nervous or scared. Strangely, what she felt was a cold calm, as if her heart had frozen over. Incapable of feeling any more pain, tonight was not the end for her, but a beginning, the beginning of her freedom. The five-star hotel stood imposing on Fifth Avenue. Its main lobby was packed with people dressed to the nines. Laughter and the clinking of glasses could be heard everywhere. Jason handed his car keys to the valet and walked ahead of Elizabeth without waiting for her. Elizabeth followed from behind, keeping a distance of several steps as she had been ordered. She could feel the stares of a few people looking at her out of the corner of their eyes. Curious looks that quickly turned into disdain upon seeing her appearance, which contrasted sharply with the luxury surrounding her. The main ballroom was truly breathtaking. A giant crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a golden light throughout the room. The round tables were arranged with flawless white tablecloths and adorned with fresh lilies. Jazz music from a live band in the corner of the room added a touch of elegance to the atmosphere. Hundreds of people, the top executives and best employees of Sterling Holdings, were gathered there. These were the people who indirectly worked for Elizabeth, people whose destinies were in her hands. And tonight, amidst them all, she was just a woman without a name. Upon entering the room, Jason immediately turned to look at Elizabeth. "Okay, wait near the food area," he said, pointing to a slightly dark corner near the buffet tables. "Do not move from there. Grab a drink or something to eat if you want. And remember everything I told you. Do not do anything stupid." After saying that, he turned around and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her alone, without looking back even once. Elizabeth took a deep breath. The show had begun. She walked slowly toward the corner Jason had pointed out, grabbed a glass of orange juice, and stood next to a large pillar, using it as a shield from people's stares. From her position, she could see almost the entire room. She was like a director observing her actors from backstage. Her eyes locked onto Jason. Her husband was like a fish that had found water again. He moved nimbly from one group to another, greeting people with a wide smile, laughing with fake roars of laughter, shaking the hands of the directors with exaggerated respect. He was a perfect chameleon, capable of changing the color of his skin according to his social environment. And then Elizabeth saw her. Ashley. The woman looked absolutely stunning in a fiery red dress that hugged her curves perfectly. She had her hair pinned up in a modern updo, and her lips were painted with a red lipstick that matched her dress. She walked with total confidence, greeting everyone as if she were the queen of the night. Shortly after, Jason and Ashley met. They did not need words, just a smile, a glance. And Jason wrapped his arm around Ashley's waist possessively. They looked so good together, so perfect. The ambitious power couple ready to conquer the corporate world. Elizabeth watched them from a distance. She felt as if her heart were being squeezed. She watched Jason whisper something into Ashley's ear, making the woman laugh flirtatiously. She watched Jason pour Ashley a glass of champagne, while she stood here with nothing but a glass of orange juice. She saw Jason's coworkers patting him on the back, looking at Ashley with admiration. They were the ideal couple, and Elizabeth. Elizabeth was the dirty secret that had to be hidden away in a corner of the room. A few junior employees getting food looked at Elizabeth with pity. Perhaps they thought she was a catering worker on her break, or a distant relative of some low-ranking employee. Elizabeth just offered them a faint smile, a smile that did not reach her eyes. She did not need their pity. Tonight, she only needed the strength to finish what she had to finish. She spotted Mr. Vance near the stage, talking to several members of the board of directors. For a split second, their eyes met. Mr. Vance gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a wordless message that said, "I am here, ma'am. I am with you." Elizabeth returned the nod in the exact same manner. The strength of her loyal ally was more than enough. She turned her gaze back to Jason and Ashley. Now they were laughing with the senior vice president of another division. Ashley was saying something with sheer arrogance, and Jason was looking at her with absolute adoration, a look Elizabeth had never received in her 2 years of marriage. In that moment, Elizabeth knew there was nothing left to save. No hope remained. The fire of love she had once tried to ignite for Jason had completely burned out, leaving only the cold ashes of betrayal. She drank her orange juice in one gulp. The empty glass felt cold in her hand, as cold as her heart right then. She would wait no longer. She was ready to go in search of her own destiny. The soft jazz music became the soundtrack of a drama invisible to the majority. The party had reached its peak. Everyone was absorbed in conversations, laughter, and the clinking of champagne flutes. Jason felt like the king of the world. He was in the center of a small circle that included the most influential people in his division. Among them, Mr. Arrington, the vice president of marketing, the man whose job was Jason's next target. By his side, Ashley clung to him flirtatiously, perfectly playing her role as the supportive, charming partner. Jason was roaring with laughter at a joke. Mr. Arrington made when he saw a dark shadow approaching. His heart stopped for a second when he realized the shadow was Elizabeth. What was that woman doing here? Had he not ordered her to stay put in the corner? Panic washed over him, terrified that Elizabeth would do something crazy and ruin everything. Elizabeth walked calmly. She had no intention of approaching them. She only wanted to put her empty glass on the nearest table and get a glass of water. Her throat was dry. However, fate seemed to deliberately guide her straight into the eye of the hurricane. As she walked past their group, the sharp-eyed Mr. Arrington spotted her. Jason. Mr. Arrington called out, his deep voice interrupting their laughter. Who is this very plain woman? I do not believe I have seen her before. Now all eyes were on Elizabeth. Elizabeth stopped, standing awkwardly under the scrutiny of their inquisitive stares. She could feel Ashley's piercing gaze stabbing into her, full of hatred and triumph. This was the defining moment for Jason. He could have told the truth. She is my wife. Or he could have lied elegantly. She is a distant relative, but arrogance and cruelty had poisoned his mind. He saw this as an opportunity, not a threat. An opportunity to prove how high he had climbed, how far he had left his old world behind, and at the same time, to humiliate Elizabeth at her lowest point. A cynical smile formed on Jason's lips. He looked at Elizabeth with pure disdain, as if she were a disgusting insect. "Oh, Mr. Errington," he said in a light, casual tone, as if speaking of something entirely unimportant. "This is Elizabeth." He paused, letting everyone wait. Then, with a voice loud enough for everyone around him to hear, he continued, "She is my housekeeper. She is a very hard worker. She just happened to come by to help out around here if anything was needed." Time seemed to stop. The jazz music suddenly sounded discordant. The air around Elizabeth thinned out, making it hard to breathe. Housekeeper. That word echoed in her head, striking her consciousness like a sledgehammer. So that was what she was in Jason's eyes. Not a wife, not a life partner, not even a distant relative. She was just a maid. A few people in the group chuckled uncomfortably. Mr. Errington raised his eyebrows, looking a bit surprised, but he did not comment. Ashley, on the other hand, smiled triumphantly. Her smile was so wide, so satisfied, as if she had just won the biggest lottery of her life. She looked at Elizabeth with such blatant superiority, enjoying every single second of the suffering of the woman standing before her. Elizabeth felt nothing but a coldness that seeped into her bones. Her already cracked heart was now shattered into pieces, turned to dust. There was nothing left to save, nothing left to fight for. As if that humiliation were not enough, Jason decided to plunge the final dagger straight into Elizabeth's heart. He pulled Ashley closer, wrapped his arm firmly around her waist, and tenderly kissed her cheek. "Actually, sir, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you all to someone very special to me." He looked at Ashley with a fake look of deep love. "I want to introduce you to Ashley, my fiancé." The second explosion. If the word housekeeper was a sledgehammer, the phrase my fiancé was an atomic bomb that leveled whatever was left of Elizabeth's feelings. He had not only denied her, he had replaced her. And he did it all in public, right on the stage of the farce Jason had created. He had erased her from his life as if she never existed. Elizabeth looked at Jason's face, the face of the man she had once sincerely loved, the face of the man who slept in the same bed with her every night. She searched for a shred of regret, a trace of guilt, but she found nothing. What she found was blind ambition and a terrifying emptiness. Then she looked at Ashley, the woman who proudly stole her husband, who was now smiling arrogantly as if she were the ultimate winner. Elizabeth did not cry. She did not scream. She would not give them that satisfaction. Instead, something inside her awakened, something that had been dormant for a very long time. A severely wounded lioness that was now opening her eyes with a burning fury. The pain transformed into strength. The humiliation became fuel. With her back straight and her head held high, Elizabeth looked directly into Jason's eyes. She said nothing. Her stare was enough. A cold, piercing glare, filled with a promise. The promise of vengeance. Jason, seeing that look, felt a little intimidated for a moment, but he quickly dismissed it, assuming it was just the empty stare of a weak, defeated woman. Without saying a word, Elizabeth turned around and walked away from the group. Her steps were firm and measured. The crowd seemed to part for her, sensing the icy aura radiating from her. She did not return to her corner. She walked straight toward a quiet hallway that led to the restrooms and the staff rooms. Each of her steps was a decision. Step 1, end her marriage. Step 2, end her suffering. Step 3, begin her revenge. In that deserted hallway, she finally leaned against the wall. She did not cry. She simply closed her eyes, letting all the pain flow out of her, transforming into a new energy, the energy of absolute anger. She pulled her phone out of the small clutch she was carrying. Her hands were not shaking. With steady fingers, she typed a brief text message to the only person she could trust. Her message consisted of only 3 words, sent to Mr. Vance. It is time. The hallway now felt cold and silent, in sharp contrast to the noise and fake warmth of the ballroom. Elizabeth leaned against the smooth marble wall, feeling its coolness through the thin fabric of her dress, but it failed to cool the fire raging in her chest. The brief message had been sent. 3 words that would change everything. It is time. A simple sentence that was a declaration of war. For a moment, she stood motionless. Her body trembled violently, not out of fear, but from the tidal wave of emotions that finally broke the dam of patience she had built up over 2 years. Jason's humiliation was the final stone that brought that dam down. And now a torrent flooded her soul. She brought her hands to her mouth, stifling the first sob that finally escaped her throat. Tears streamed down her face, hot and full of sorrow. It was not the cry of a weak woman lamenting her fate. It was a cry of mourning. She wept for herself, for the naive Elizabeth who wanted sincere love so badly that she was willing to blind herself to all the red flags. She wept for her marriage, a beautiful structure that turned out to be built on a foundation of sand, lies, and ambition. She wept for the small memories she once considered sweet, which now tasted like poison. The first time Jason praised her, when he held her hand in the park, when he said his sacred vows before God, it was all fake. It was all part of a grand script, where she was nothing more than a background prop. Every word Jason had spoken in the ballroom played in her head like a broken record. My housekeeper. My fiancé. The words were so cruel, so sharp, that they shredded the remnants of her dignity until nothing was left. Jason had not only betrayed her, he had annihilated Elizabeth's existence as his wife. He had erased her. In the eyes of Jason and his world, Elizabeth was nothing but a shadow, invisible dust. Her crying intensified, her body slowly sliding down to the cold floor. She hugged her knees, allowing herself to break one last time in that lonely corridor. She let all the pain, all the disappointment, all the repressed anger pour out with those tears. She needed to empty herself of all that venom before she could fill herself back up with something else. Something stronger. She remembered her father, the late Richard Sterling, a strict man but with a heart as soft as silk. Her father had once told her, "Elizabeth, my daughter, crying is not a sign of weakness. Crying is our soul's way of cleaning its wounds. When you finish crying, stand up stronger than before, because you will have proven that you are a survivor." Tonight, she was a survivor. She had survived the greatest storm of betrayal in her life. Slowly, her crying subsided. The tears stopped flowing. The only thing left was the wet trail on her cheeks and the stinging in her eyes. She lifted her head, looking at her blurry reflection in the shiny marble floor. What she saw was no longer the face of a victim. What she saw was wrath, a pure, cold, and highly focused wrath. The pain had metamorphosed, going from a hot, burning liquid to a sharp block of solid ice. She would no longer be the gentle, submissive Elizabeth. That woman had died in the ballroom, murdered by her own husband's words. The one resurrected from her death was Elizabeth Sterling, the heiress, the leader, the queen who had hidden her crown for far too long. Jason wanted to see a simple woman. She would show him. She would show him exactly how dangerous it was to underestimate a woman who looked simple, because behind that simplicity could hide a force capable of shaking the earth. Her phone vibrated softly in her hand. A text reply from Mr. Vance. "Executing immediately, Miss Sterling. The stage awaits you." Elizabeth read the message, and a slight, icy smile formed on her lips. Mr. Vance never let her down. She stood up. Her feet felt firmly planted on the ground. She walked toward the women's restroom at the end of the hall. Standing in front of a large, gold-framed mirror, she looked at herself one last time. Her eyes were puffy and red, but her gaze was as piercing as an eagle's. She turned on the faucet and washed her face with cold water, scrubbing away the traces of tears. Every splash of water felt like a baptism for her new self. She looked at the hair tie holding her hair, a simple ponytail, a symbol of her restraint. With a swift motion, she pulled it out. Her thick, long black hair cascaded beautifully down her back like a silk curtain. This was her. This was her crown. A small act that felt like a massive rebellion. Her cheap black dress now felt different. It was no longer a piece of fabric meant to wrap her in shame. It was a uniform of war. Its dark color would be the perfect backdrop for the light show she was about to ignite. She did not need an expensive gown or sparkling jewelry to show who she was. Her power did not reside in what she wore, but in who she was. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air that felt brand new and full of possibilities. She was done crying. She was done mourning. Now it was time to act. She smoothed out her dress, tossed her hair back over her shoulders, and looked at her reflection one final time. The woman in the mirror stared back. Her eyes shone with absolute determination. "Let us end this," the woman in the mirror whispered silently. Elizabeth nodded. She was ready. She walked out of the restroom, leaving the old Elizabeth behind, and marched straight back into the arena. When Elizabeth stepped out of the dark hallway and re-entered the brilliantly lit ballroom, something was different, not just in her, but in the very atmosphere surrounding her. It was as if the center of gravity in the room had shifted, and it was now focused entirely on her. She was no longer walking with her head slightly bowed, trying to go unnoticed. Now, her head was held high, her chin slightly lifted, and her gaze fixed straight ahead, cutting through the crowd without an ounce of fear. Her steps were firm and rhythmic on the marble floor. Every click of her plain shoes sounded like the beat of a war drum that only she could hear. She was no longer slipping through the crowd. On the contrary, the crowd seemed to naturally part to make way for her. People who had previously been busy chatting instinctively stopped talking and turned around. They saw a woman in a plain black dress, with her long hair flowing loose, walking with an aura of undeniable power. Whispers began to spread from table to table like wildfire. "Who is that woman? I think I have seen her before, but she looks different. Look at the fire in her eyes. She is not just anybody." The people who had looked at her with disdain earlier were now watching her with a mix of curiosity and awe. They did not know who she was, but they could feel that something massive was about to happen. From the other side of the room, Jason saw her. He was laughing at a compliment from Mr. Arrington, while Ashley's hand was still wrapped affectionately around his arm. The laugh died in Jason's throat when his eyes caught the figure of Elizabeth walking straight toward the stage. His heart pounded in his chest. This time, not out of joy, but from a terrible sense of dread. What was that woman doing? Why was everyone looking at her? Who does she think she is? "Looks like the housekeeper wants some attention," Ashley whispered, but there was an edge of unease in her voice. "Shut up," Jason hissed. His eyes never left Elizabeth. He watched the way she walked, her posture, the way she held her head. It was not the posture of a maid. It was the posture of someone who owned the place. A cold panic began to crawl down his spine. What was that crazy woman about to do? Elizabeth kept walking, completely ignoring the stares and the whispers. She had only one target, the stage. Near the small staircase leading up to the stage, Mr. Vance was already waiting for her. The most respected senior managing director in the entire company stood tall, upright, like a loyal bodyguard. He extended his hand to her. "Everything is ready according to your orders, Miss Sterling," Mr. Vance whispered softly. His voice was firm and full of deep respect. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. You will never know how much your support means to me tonight," Elizabeth replied. Her voice was calm, but trembling with contained emotion. She accepted Mr. Vance's hand and walked up the steps to the stage. On the stage, an MC was trying to liven up the mood with a lame joke, getting ready to announce the winner of a raffle. He stood there baffled when he saw an unknown woman and his senior director suddenly step onto the stage. Before the MC could say anything, Mr. Vance was already at his side, whispering something rapidly into his ear. The MC's eyes widened in sheer shock. The color completely drained from his face. He nodded stiffly several times. Then, with a trembling hand, he handed the microphone he was holding over to Elizabeth, before discreetly backing away to the rear of the stage as if he had just seen a ghost. That interaction did not go unnoticed by a single guest in the ballroom. The atmosphere, which had been buzzing loudly just moments before, fell completely silent. The live jazz music playing in the background stopped abruptly following a sharp hand signal from Mr. Vance to the sound engineer. Now, the only sound that could be heard was the soft hum of the air conditioning. Hundreds of pairs of eyes locked onto a single point. The mysterious woman in the black dress, who was now standing alone in the center of the stage holding a microphone. The main chandeliers that had previously illuminated the whole room dimmed slowly, leaving a single, brilliant spotlight focused directly on Elizabeth, turning her into the only source of light in an ocean of darkness. Down in the crowd, Jason froze entirely. His world seemed to grind to a halt. He could not understand what was happening. Why was Elizabeth on the stage? Why was Mr. Vance helping her? Why had the entire corporate event been stopped just for her? Ashley, standing right next to him, was just as pale. Her grip on Jason's arm tightened so hard it hurt. The triumphant smirk on her face had vanished, replaced by an expression of pure confusion and rising terror. Elizabeth stood in silence for a moment on the stage, letting the quietness completely envelop the room. She took a deep breath. Her gaze swept over all the faces watching her. Confused faces, curious faces, and some, like Jason's and Ashley's, filled with a dread that was just beginning to manifest. She could feel her own heartbeat, strong and steady. She was no longer shaking. She was no longer afraid. This was her arena. This was her kingdom. And tonight, the Queen had returned to take her throne. She slowly raised the microphone to her lips. The silence in the ballroom was so dense that it felt as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the very first word that would come out of this woman's mouth. The real show was about to begin. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. So heavy, it felt as if the concept of sound itself had been forcibly ripped from the venue. Hundreds of people, managers, vice presidents, and top-tier employees were now frozen in place. All their eyes were glued to the solitary figure on the stage, the woman in the plain black dress gripping the microphone with terrifying composure. Under the harsh glare of the spotlight, she no longer looked like an ordinary woman. She looked like a judge about to read her final verdict. Elizabeth exhaled slowly. The sound of her breath could be heard faintly through the state-of-the-art speakers. It was the only noise in an ocean of silence. Her pale lips finally parted. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice was crystal clear, perfectly calm, and resonated with an unexpected, heavy authority. The voice traveled to every corner of the massive room, touching every single person and compelling them to listen. It was not the voice of a housekeeper. It was not the voice of a frightened wife. It was the voice of a leader. In the middle of the crowd, Jason felt a bead of cold sweat slide down his temple. He recognized that voice, yet at the same time, it felt entirely foreign to him. There was a raw power behind it that he had never heard before. Ashley was gripping his arm so hard he winced. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Thank you for taking the time to attend the Sterling Holdings annual celebration gala tonight," Elizabeth continued in a polite, highly professional tone. "Tonight is a night to celebrate our collective achievements. Achievements that would absolutely not have been possible without the dedication of all of you. And, of course, without the vision of the founders of this corporation." She paused, letting her words sink in. The senior executives sitting at the front tables exchanged confused glances, wondering exactly who this woman was who dared to speak as if she were the host of the event. "I know that many of you probably do not recognize me," Elizabeth said, her eyes now sweeping the entire room, stopping for a fraction of a second on passing faces, before finally landing and locking dead onto Jason. Jason felt as though her stare stripped him naked, tearing away every single lie and fabrication he had ever constructed. "For the past several years, I chose to live a very simple life, far away from the corporate spotlight. I wanted to see this company from a completely different perspective. I wanted to feel its pulse from the ground up. And most importantly, I wanted to find sincerity in a world that is so often blinded by wealth and luxury." Jason's heart hammered faster and faster, so violently he feared the people standing next to him could hear it. The bad feeling that had been crawling up his spine had now transformed into a massive monster grabbing him by the throat. "It cannot be. This cannot be happening." Elizabeth lifted her chin just a little higher. The spotlight illuminated her features, highlighting an expression of absolute resolve that she had kept hidden for far too long behind soft, accommodating smiles. This was the moment. There was no turning back now. "My name is Elizabeth Sterling." A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Sterling. That name was sacred in this building. Several older directors who had worked directly under Richard Sterling's leadership leaned forward in their chairs. They narrowed their eyes, desperately trying to recognize the woman's face. Then, Elizabeth dropped the ultimate bomb. "I am the daughter of the late Richard and Eleanor Sterling, the original founders of this corporation. And for the past 2 years, since their passing, I have been the sole owner and chief executive officer of Sterling Holdings." If the previous silence had been heavy, the one that followed that declaration felt like a black hole sucking out all the oxygen in the room. For a split second, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then, reality hit everyone all at once. The sharp crack of a champagne flute, slipping from someone's hand and shattering against the marble floor, broke the spell, and the entire ballroom erupted into a chaotic sea of deafening whispers. Elizabeth Sterling? Mr. Richards' daughter is alive? The CEO? So she has been leading us this whole time? But her clothes? The senior vice presidents, who were confused just moments before, drastically shifted their expressions from shock to sudden recognition, and finally, to overwhelming respect. They could see it now, the shadow of Richard Sterling's legendary charisma alive in Elizabeth's piercing gaze. However, for one specific person in that room, Elizabeth's words were not a corporate revelation. They were a public execution. For Jason, the earth stopped spinning on its axis. The floor beneath his custom leather shoes felt like it split open to swallow him into a bottomless abyss of darkness. Elizabeth Sterling. Owner. CEO. The words buzzed in his ears, short-circuiting every cell in his brain. The woman whose breakfast he scoffed at every morning. The woman he gave a strictly calculated grocery allowance to. The woman he called a small-town bumpkin and an idiot behind her back. The woman who, just minutes ago, he had introduced as his housekeeper to his boss. She was his boss's ultimate boss. She owned everything he had spent his life desperately fighting for. His face turned as pale as a sheet of printer paper. His breath got caught permanently in his throat. Flashes of memory assaulted him without mercy. When Elizabeth begged him to leave Sterling Holdings, and he flatly refused. When he bragged to her about his mid-level promotion, totally unaware that his official appointment letter had likely been approved by the very woman he was bragging to. When he complained about how grueling it was to work at Sterling Holdings to the woman who literally carried the weight of the entire corporation on her shoulders, his sheer stupidity, his massive arrogance, it all felt so monumental, so cosmic. He felt like the tiniest ant in the universe that had just tried to spit directly at the sun. He turned to look at Ashley. The woman was staring at him in absolute horror. Her face was equally devoid of color. Her gaze no longer held an ounce of love or admiration, only pure, unadulterated hatred. You didn't know?" she whispered, trembling uncontrollably. Jason could only shake his head weakly. Ashley let go of Jason's arm as if his suit jacket were made of burning coals, taking a massive step back to put distance between them. Their ship had sunk before it even left the harbor. And now, it was every man for himself. Up on the stage, Elizabeth remained perfectly still, allowing the colossal weight of the information to be absorbed by the crowd. She stood like a queen who had just announced her return to her kingdom. She let the truth permeate the air, letting its shockwave obliterate every pillar of lies Jason had ever built. Her eyes, which had been scanning the room, locked back onto one single target: her husband. She saw Jason's pale face, his vacant, horrified stare, and his slightly swaying body. She did not feel a rush of petty triumph. What she felt was a cold, absolute relief. The mask had finally fallen. It was finally over. After letting the brutal truth hang in the air for what felt like an eternity, Elizabeth raised the microphone once more. Her calm voice instantly sliced through the chaotic murmurs in the ballroom, snapping everyone's attention right back to her. "May I have your attention again, please?" she commanded. Her tone was now slightly sharper, much firmer. "I know this news is likely very surprising for the vast majority of you, but believe me, no one in this room is more surprised tonight than I am." Her eyes never left Jason. "I am shocked to discover the ethical standards prevailing among certain employees in the company my parents built with their blood and sweat, a company that strictly upholds the core values of integrity and basic human respect." She paused. Her gaze flicked over to Ashley, who was now standing as rigid as a wax statue. "And now, if you do not mind, I have a minor domestic issue that, unfortunately, I must resolve right here in front of all of you, because someone deliberately dragged it onto this public stage." Her words dripped with a biting, lethal irony. Every single head in the room turned in unison to look squarely at Jason. Jason felt like a cornered animal. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were staring at him, judging him, dissecting him. He wanted to run, to sprint out the doors and disappear, but his feet felt glued to the marble floor. "Jason," Elizabeth called out. His own name, spoken in Elizabeth's frigid voice through the towering speakers, sounded like a death sentence. Please step forward. It was not a request. It was an executive order. Jason did not move a muscle. His body completely refused to obey. Mr. Arrington, who was standing right next to him, looked at him with sheer disgust before stepping entirely out of the way, leaving Jason totally exposed. Seeing that Jason was paralyzed, Elizabeth continued, "Oh, there is no need. Allow me to come to you through my words." She gripped the microphone tighter. Jason, a marketing manager who, from what I have heard, is highly successful, a deeply ambitious man willing to do absolutely anything to climb the corporate ladder. And also, a husband. She pronounced the word husband with an emphasis that made the entire room hold its collective breath. A husband so immensely proud of his new corporate status that he is humiliated by the wife who supported him from the very bottom. A husband who prefers to introduce his own legal wife as, "What was it you said, Jason?" "Ah, yes, a housekeeper." A wave of crushing, suffocating shame burned Jason's face. He could hear multiple executives gasp in shock. This corporate scandal was infinitely worse than anyone could have imagined. "You know, Jason," Elizabeth continued, her voice dropping slightly softer, but sounding infinitely more lethal, "I can forgive many things. I can forgive your staggering arrogance. I can forgive the way you constantly belittled me in my own home. I could perhaps even try to forgive your blatant infidelity." Her gaze shot over to Ashley for a fraction of a second. Ashley immediately dropped her head, staring at the floor. "But the one thing I will never, ever forgive," Elizabeth's voice hardened to steel, radiating a freezing power, "is that you deliberately trampled on my dignity and my honor in front of my own company just to feed your rotten, pathetic personal ambition. You did not just humiliate me. You humiliated the institution of marriage, a vow you swore before God. Elizabeth, honey, Jason finally found his voice, but all that came out was a raspy, pathetic, broken whisper. "I can explain. There is absolutely nothing to explain." Elizabeth cut him off instantly. Her voice boomed through the hall. "Your explanation was made crystal clear the exact second you introduced another woman as your fiancée. Tonight, you have shown your true character, and a character like yours has absolutely no place in my home, nor in my corporation." This was the climax, the final judgment. For a severe violation of corporate ethics that cannot be tolerated, a disgraceful conflict of interest, and highly immoral conduct that has stained the flawless reputation of Sterling Holdings, effective immediately, and before every single witness in this room, Elizabeth stared straight into Jason's desperate, tear-filled eyes. "You are fired." The words echoed violently across the grand ballroom. A final, irreversible verdict. Jason stumbled backward as if he had literally just taken a devastating punch to the jaw. His dreams, his career, his entire future, obliterated in 3 simple words. But Elizabeth was not finished. Her chilling gaze shifted to Ashley, who was physically shaking with terror. "And you, Miss Ashley?" Elizabeth said, with dripping condescension. "This corporation seeks employees who stand out for their grueling hard work and unshakable integrity, not for their manipulative cunning and their talent for destroying other people's homes. Your personal ambition has entirely blinded your professional work ethic. Please escort your future husband to the unemployment line. You are fired as well." The second verdict had fallen. Ashley covered her face with both hands. Her loud, ugly sobs began to echo in the quiet room. Elizabeth made a tiny, sharp gesture toward the back of the stage. Security. As if they had been waiting for the exact cue, 2 massive, broad-shouldered security guards appeared from the wings of the ballroom and marched with quick, heavy steps directly toward Jason and Ashley. The crowd automatically parted, creating a wide aisle of judgment. "Elizabeth, no, please," Jason tried to beg, extending a trembling hand toward the stage. "Give me a second chance." But Elizabeth only stared down at him with ice in her veins. "Your second chances ran out a very long time ago," she hissed softly, speaking only to herself. The security guards arrived squarely in front of Jason and Ashley. "Please, sir, ma'am. We are escorting you to the exit," one of them said in a firm, no-nonsense tone. Jason and Ashley had absolutely no choice. Bathed in infinite shame, they walked flanked by the towering guards. passing right through the middle of hundreds of pairs of eyes staring at them with a potent mixture of utter disgust, pity, and revulsion. Their walk of shame felt tortuous and endless. Ashley's loud sobbing and Jason's staggering, defeated footsteps became the only soundtrack accompanying their catastrophic downfall. After the heavy oak doors of the ballroom slammed shut behind them, Elizabeth turned her attention back to her guests. She took a deep breath, as if expelling all the toxic energy from the drama that had just unfolded. "My deepest apologies for that brief, unpleasant interruption," she said, her voice instantly returning to its flawless professional cadence. "Now, let us put all of that unnecessary drama behind us and continue with tonight's celebration to properly honor the incredible hard work of every single one of you." For a brief moment, the room remained dead silent, everyone still far too stunned to react. Then, from the VIP table directly in front of the stage, Mr. Vance stood up and began to clap. His firm, steady applause shattered the silence. Following his lead, one by one, the rest of the board of directors stood up and joined in. Within seconds, the entire grand ballroom erupted into a thunderous, deafening standing ovation. It was no longer a polite, obligatory corporate applause. It was an ovation roaring with genuine awe, admiration, and profound respect for the absolute queen who had just reclaimed her kingdom in the most spectacular way imaginable. Elizabeth gave a small, graceful nod to the crowd. A faint, genuine smile finally broke across her lips. Revenge was sweet, but what tasted infinitely sweeter was her absolute freedom. The towering double doors of the ballroom shut completely behind Jason and Ashley, violently spitting them back out into the harsh reality of the real world. The muffled sound of the thunderous standing ovation echoing from inside felt like the universe laughing out loud at their total destruction. They now stood in the deserted lobby of the luxury hotel. The bright crystal lighting felt far too exposing, stripping their shame bare for all to see. Two security guards stood firmly planted not too far away, ensuring they actually left the premises. For a long moment, Jason and Ashley just stood there in deafening silence. The shock gripped them so violently that the words seemed permanently frozen in their throats. Ashley was the first to break. "This is all your fault," she shrieked, her voice raspy and fueled by pure venom. She spun around to face Jason. Her eyes, which hours ago had looked at him like he was a god, now burned with unhinged rage. "Housekeeper? Fiancé? Are you out of your mind? You destroyed everything. You ruined my entire career. You ruined my life." She began pounding her small fists wildly against Jason's chest, but her blows were weak and fueled by sheer desperation. Jason, his mind still entirely blank, simply absorbed the hits without moving a muscle. Slowly, the paralyzing shock wore off, replaced instantly by a tidal wave of panic and an equally violent anger. "My fault?" Jason hissed, brutally grabbing both of Ashley's wrists to stop her from hitting him. "You were the one who pushed me into this. You told me I needed to prove who the boss was. You smiled and enjoyed every single second while I was humiliating her." He could not even bring himself to say Elizabeth's name out loud. "I never told you to lie about your own legal wife. A wife who turned out to be the CEO of the entire corporation. You idiot. You are the stupidest man I have ever met in my entire life." Ashley screamed, struggling violently to rip her hands out of his grip. "You told me she was just a small-town nobody. You said she had nothing. You said you were going to divorce her as soon as you got promoted. It was all lies. I did not know," Jason roared back, his voice echoing off the marble pillars of the empty lobby. "How the hell was I supposed to know? She set me up. She tricked me for 2 entire years." He desperately tried to grasp for a justification, desperately trying to place the blame entirely on Elizabeth, but even to his own ears, the excuse sounded incredibly pathetic and totally unhinged. Their vicious, screaming argument, loaded with toxic accusations, became free entertainment for several hotel staff members passing through the lobby. The employees watched them with a mix of morbid curiosity and total disgust. Jason and Ashley, the power couple who had strutted into the hotel an hour earlier, with their heads held high and dripping in arrogance, now looked like 2 stray dogs fighting over a piece of trash. The glamorous love and mutual admiration they had so proudly paraded around turned out to be nothing more than a paper-thin facade, hiding their mutual greed and toxic ambition. Placed under pressure, the facade immediately shattered, exposing the rotting core underneath. Jason shoved Ashley's hands away. He stumbled blindly toward the revolving doors of the hotel exit, followed closely by Ashley, who was still violently sobbing. Outside on Fifth Avenue, the crisp night air hit Jason's face like a physical slap. His hands shook violently as he pulled out his phone. He desperately pulled up Elizabeth's contact, trying to call her, to beg for mercy, to offer any pathetic explanation he could invent. He hit dial. The screen instantly flashed a single word. Blocked. Panic escalating, he turned to Ashley. "Give me your phone." He snatched it from her and dialed Elizabeth's number again. It went straight to a dead tone. Rejected immediately. It was over. It was truly, undeniably over. He glanced over at the valet stand. The same valet he had arrogantly tossed a tip to earlier was standing there, but the employee was looking at him totally differently now, staring at him with a knowing look, as if he fully understood that the man standing before him was an absolute nobody. Jason's professional reputation was completely annihilated. The news of a scandal of this magnitude, a manager publicly humiliating the billionaire CEO who happened to be his wife, would spread like a wildfire through the Wall Street and corporate circles by 8:00 a.m. the following morning. No respectable corporation in the country would ever hire him. He was permanently blacklisted. A dark, suffocating despair violently wrapped around Jason's chest. His knees gave out. He stumbled and collapsed onto the hard concrete of the Manhattan sidewalk. Everything he had ever built, every single thing he had ever dreamed of, wiped off the face of the earth in less than 10 minutes, entirely because of his own staggering arrogance. He dropped his head into his hands, and right there on the sidewalk, he finally sobbed. They were not tears of genuine remorse or guilt. They were the desperate, pathetic tears of a complete loser who realized he had just lost the winning lottery ticket. Ashley just stared down at him with unmasked disgust. Without saying a single word, she turned on her heels and stormed down the avenue into the New York night, leaving him entirely alone on the concrete, sitting right in the middle of the rubble of the lies they had built together. Meanwhile, back inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere had completely transformed. After Jason and Ashley had been forcibly removed, Elizabeth smoothly and flawlessly took total control of the corporate event. She stepped down from the stage and was immediately swarmed by the board of directors. "Miss Sterling, I honestly do not know what to say, Mr. Arrington stammered, his face still pale with absolute mortification. "I deeply apologize if earlier I—" "Do not worry about it at all, Mr. Arrington." Elizabeth interrupted smoothly, offering him a calm, reassuring smile. "You had absolutely no idea. Let us consider the matter entirely forgotten." Her dignified, highly professional, and magnanimous attitude instantly won her the undying respect of every executive in the room. For the remainder of the evening, Elizabeth was constantly surrounded by the top brass of Sterling Holdings. The vice presidents and senior managers who previously only knew her as a mysterious signature on corporate documents were now aggressively competing to introduce themselves, to give her brief progress reports, and to pledge their absolute loyalty to her leadership. Elizabeth handled the corporate sharks with an extraordinary display of calm intelligence. She effortlessly discussed complex marketing strategies with Mr. Arrington, tore through quarterly financial projections with the chief financial officer, and debated aggressive national expansion plans with the board of directors. In less than an hour, she proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was not just a lucky heiress with a trust fund. She was a highly competent, ruthless, and visionary CEO. When the gala finally wound down and the guests began heading for the coat check, Elizabeth positioned herself by the main doors, personally shaking hands with her employees one by one as they left, a classic leadership gesture her legendary father used to do. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She had confidently stepped into the exact place she belonged. "You handled yourself impeccably tonight, Miss Sterling." The familiar voice of Mr. Vance sounded from right behind her shoulder. The older gentleman looked at her with slightly glossy eyes, practically bursting with pride. "Your father would be incredibly proud of the woman you are." Elizabeth smiled, a truly sincere smile. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. I absolutely could not have pulled any of this off without your help and your unwavering loyalty. If I may ask, what are your plans for the evening regarding your residence?" "Mr. Vance asked cautiously, fully aware of the apartment in Queens. Elizabeth turned her gaze toward the massive windows, looking out over the neon-lit, bustling streets of Manhattan. "That tiny apartment is not my home, sir. It was just a movie set. Tonight, I am finally going back to my real home. She did not take the subway back to the cramped apartment in Queens. Instead, a sleek, black-chauffeured town car, personally arranged by Mr. Vance, drove her out of the city and up the familiar winding roads toward an exclusive, heavily forested neighborhood in Greenwich, Connecticut. The massive wrought iron gates slowly swung open, revealing a quarter-mile-long private driveway flanked by perfectly manicured, sprawling gardens. At the very end of the driveway stood a breathtaking, multi-million-dollar brick estate, the Sterling family mansion, the home where she had grown up, completely filled with memories of loud laughter, blazing fireplaces, and absolute warmth. The home she had abandoned for over 2 years. As the town car pulled up to the front steps, the exterior lights of the massive estate automatically flickered on, warmly welcoming its rightful owner back. A very fine layer of dust covered some of the antique furniture in the foyer, but the house still felt unbelievably majestic and inviting. This was her true home. This was her true identity. She walked slowly into the grand living room, stopping to look up at the massive, hand-painted oil portrait of her parents hanging directly above the marble fireplace. They seemed to be smiling down at her, as if silently saying, "Welcome back, our beautiful daughter." Elizabeth smiled right back at the painting. She had returned entirely alone, carrying a few fresh scars. But she was whole, she was unbroken, and most importantly, she was completely free. 3 months had passed since that incredibly dramatic night at the Sterling Holdings annual gala. The seasons had changed, and so had the trajectory of Elizabeth Sterling's life. She no longer hid from the world. On the contrary, she embraced her massive destiny with wide-open arms, aggressively leading her family's corporate empire with a level of courage and visionary strategy that shocked Wall Street. That crisp morning, Elizabeth was sitting firmly at the head of a massive mahogany conference table. Inside the state-of-the-art corporate boardroom, dominated by sleek glass walls and dark wood accents, she wore a perfectly tailored navy blue power suit. Her long dark hair was pulled back into a sharp, elegant modern bun. Sitting along the table were the senior executives of Sterling Holdings, middle-aged men and women boasting decades of cutthroat experience in the corporate world. Every single one of them was listening with rapt attention as Elizabeth aggressively pitched her new master plan for capturing the digital market share. She spoke with total fluidity and unshakable confidence, flawlessly reciting complex data points and profit statistics entirely from memory, instantly shooting down every skeptical question with razor-sharp intelligence. There was absolutely no trace left of the timid, submissive Elizabeth from Queens. The woman commanding that boardroom was a true CEO, an apex predator of the corporate world, a born leader. She had successfully silenced every single doubt that might have lingered in the building. In just 3 short months, she had not only stabilized the massive corporation following the shock of her reveal, but she had aggressively pushed its profit margins to an entirely new level. After wrapping up the highly productive board meeting, Elizabeth walked back to her personal corner office, a massive, sprawling suite on the top floor of the Sterling Corporate Tower, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an uninterrupted, 360-degree panoramic view of the New York City skyline. It was her late father's old executive office, but she had completely transformed it, making it entirely her own with a touch of modern, sleek, feminine decor. Sitting precisely in the center of her meticulously organized glass desk was a thick brown manila envelope. Mr. Vance knocked gently, walked in, and placed a secondary file folder right next to it. The final documents from the legal team just arrived via courier, Miss Sterling. "Everything has been completely finalized," he said in a professional, quiet tone. Elizabeth picked up the envelope and sliced it open. Inside was the final divorce decree, fully signed and officially ratified by the state judge. She and Jason were legally and permanently severed. She stared down at the legal document for a long moment. There was no lingering pain. There was no boiling anger. There was no regret. There was only a massive, overwhelming wave of pure relief, as if a 100-pound boulder she had been carrying on her back for years had finally been lifted off her shoulders. Grabbing her expensive fountain pen, she smoothly signed her name on the required final lines, a signature that symbolically slammed the door permanently shut on the darkest chapter of her life. "Is there any news regarding them?" Elizabeth asked in a low voice as she closed the file folder. She did not actually care, but a very tiny, human part of her brain simply wanted the closure of knowing. Mr. Vance nodded briefly. The news of the scandal between Jason and Ashley spread incredibly fast through the industry networks. Absolutely no major corporation was willing to risk the PR nightmare of hiring them. Their corporate careers in this city are completely dead. According to the background checks I periodically receive, Jason went completely bankrupt. He had to sell his car and was forced to move back in with his parents in his small hometown in the Midwest. Mr. Vance paused, adjusting his glasses. Meanwhile, the last update regarding Ashley indicates she is currently working as a low-level administrative assistant at a tiny, strip mall logistics company in a different state, as far away from the glamorous corporate Manhattan lifestyle as she could possibly get. Elizabeth listened to the report with an entirely blank expression. Their miserable fate was the direct harvest of the very seeds they had planted. She felt absolutely zero pity for them, but she also felt no joy in their suffering. They were simply strangers from her past now, irrelevant ghosts who no longer possessed an ounce of power to hurt her. So be it. Their lives are no longer our concern, she stated firmly, permanently closing the subject forever. That evening, long after the rest of the executive floor had gone home, Elizabeth stood alone in front of the massive glass windows of her corner office. The setting sun was violently painting the New York sky with breathtaking shades of orange, crimson red, and deep purple. The sprawling metropolis far beneath her feet began to twinkle with millions of city lights, slowly turning on like a massive, artificial ocean of stars. This was her kingdom, not just because she possessed the legal documents claiming she owned it, but because she was an integral part of its beating heart, and she worked relentlessly every single day to ensure it thrived. She briefly thought back to the old Elizabeth, the girl who was so desperate for affection that she was entirely willing to shrink herself down just to earn the scraps of love from a man who never deserved her in the first place. She smiled a very small, bitter smile. She had lost a husband, yes, but in exchange for that loss, she had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found herself. She had found her immense strength, her razor-sharp intelligence, and the absolute dignity that she had temporarily misplaced. She had finally learned the hardest lesson of all, that true, genuine love will never, ever ask you to be less than what you truly are. She had no idea what the future held. Perhaps someday down the line, she would find love again, a mature, sincere, and equal love that valued Elizabeth Sterling in her absolute entirety. Or perhaps she would not. But right now, at this exact moment, that did not matter in the slightest. She was entirely complete. She was profoundly happy with exactly who she was, deeply fulfilled by her empire, and totally at peace with the beautiful life she was actively rebuilding from the ashes of her past. She stared out at the distant horizon, watching as the very last rays of the dying sun were slowly swallowed by the creeping darkness of the night. But Elizabeth Sterling knew better than anyone that right behind that pitch-black darkness, a brand new dawn was always waiting to break. And for the very first time in a very, very long time, she was completely ready to stand there and welcome that dawn all by herself. With her head held high and a heart overflowing with unshakable hope, the true queen had returned to her throne not just to rule, but to serve, to build, and most importantly, to be a brilliant, guiding light for herself.